The southeastern suburbs of Melbourne are some of the fastest growing in Australia. Since 1990, they have accommodated hundreds of thousands of people, not to mention new jobs and services as well. The need for improved transport to this part of the world was anticipated by planners far before this actually happened. So in this video, in my mini-series on lesser-known unbuilt railways in Melbourne, we're going to talk about the unbuilt Dandenong to Frankston Railway. Before we continue, a quick reminder to please subscribe. We're getting perilously close to 40,000, and every little bit of support helps this channel and bring more stories about Melbourne and Victoria to more people. This story begins at Lyndhurst Station. This was located on the present-day Cranbourne line and opened in 1888 as a station on the country train lines on the way to Yarram and Leongath in South Gippsland. When these lines stopped running in 1981, the station closed down with it. Even when some passenger services were briefly restored between 1984 and 1993, the station did not reopen. It was located just northwest of where the Cranbourne line crosses under the Western Port Highway today. The site is actually still on the Victorian government's maps and zoned for transport in the current planning scheme. Now we travel back to the 1920s, when local rumblings about a railway between Dandenong and the Mornington Peninsula started. As with many other transport projects at the time, the Great Depression killed off any hopes of getting this through. Their proposal was, broadly, to build a new railway line that branched off what is today the Cranbourne line at Lyndhurst and head southeast to Frankston via Carrum Downs. This would provide a direct rail connection between the two major centres of the area, Dandenong and Frankston. Some of these early discussions in the 20s even considered a further extension to link Cranbourne to Mornington because of the flat land available, such as this letter from a Mr. G. Shave of Lyndhurst South from 1925. During this period, advocates got the local councils of Moorabbin, Mordialloc, Frankston, Cranbourne, Dandenong and Oakleigh together to advocate for some kind of rail link between the Frankston and Cranbourne lines. In support of their efforts, residents formed a group with the catchy name of the Ormond Carrum Downs Piersdale Railway League. They dreamed big and envisaged an entire network with branch lines to Piersdale, Langwarrin and Carrum Downs. Unfortunately, I can't find any trace of other activities, and the group disbanded in 1942. This is also when the proposals to build the extensions died down, probably due to the Great Depression and the Second World War limiting and diverting available resources. Despite these setbacks, there were ongoing efforts to get a railway to Lyndhurst and beyond. Some residents formed committees and launched petitions, but nothing worked. Things seemed to go quiet until 1969, when the idea suddenly came back to the fore in a big way. While the 1969 Melbourne Transportation Plan was almost entirely about roads and cars, as we've discussed earlier, there were a couple of rail projects included, and the Lyndhurst to Frankston Railway was one of them. It provided more detail on exactly how it would work. There would be 6 stations between Dandenong and Frankston, a new station called Dandenong South, Lyndhurst, where the electrified line would branch off the South Gippsland line, and then 3 new stations called Harwood, Carrum Downs and Coringal. Then the line would join the Frankston line at another new station called Wells Road, before arriving into Frankston Station. This would have also required duplicating track between Dandenong and Lyndhurst, as well as various other upgrades to the existing network. Trains would have run at a peak frequency of every 10 minutes, and possibly connect to trains heading south towards Mornington via Baxter, which would have also been electrified under the 1969 plan. It's unclear to me why this was proposed over other, arguably more beneficial available transport projects. My theory is that it would have been a relatively cheap and easy project compared to others, because the land was readily available and would have been relatively straightforward to build on the flat topography, as pointed out by Mr. Shave in 1925. There was also a lot of residential, commercial and industrial development happening in the area, which the report explicitly acknowledges as one of the main reasons for proposing it in the first place. Another reason may have been because there was a new road tied to the railway. About a third of the track would have run alongside or down the middle of the proposed F35 freeway from the 1969 Transport Plan, which was built and is today Eastlink and the M3 north of the existing Frankston Freeway. So basically, building the railway may have been part of making the case for funding the F35 as well. This appears to have inspired action on a different but related railway in 1971 as well. This was when the two local governments affected banded together to try to reserve land for another alignment from Hastings to Cranbourne instead, mainly for industrial rail traffic to bypass the Frankston line. The Railways Department strongly objected to this, saying that they were instead working on the Frankston to Dandenong route. Obviously, this didn't end up being the case. The plan remained into 1985, when the Melbourne Transport Report was issued by the Metropolitan Transportation Committee. But as far as I can tell, it never received funding, and the full 1988 Met Plan didn't include it at all. The railway never appeared in planning scheme maps as a proposed route, so it doesn't seem to have progressed very far. However, as usual, there are a few signs of the project today. The first and most obvious is Dandenong Station. This is in fact the station identified in the 1969 plan as Wells Road, and was built in August 1975. It is the only one of the 4 proposed new stations to be built along the line. The name Dandenong was meant to be given to a different station further north, in between Carrum and Seaford, but this never went ahead, and it looks like that the name was recycled for the present-day station instead. As I mentioned earlier, you can also still see Lyndhurst Station zoned for transport in the planning scheme. The final question here is if the line would have been viable when it was built, and if it would have been so today. I think that unlike many other rail proposals, this one would have been a goer. Dandenong and Frankston are major hubs for hundreds of thousands of people in the southeastern suburbs. Both have been designated for development for many decades and experienced their first large growth spurts in the 1960s. Frankston more than doubled its population between 1961 and 1971, while Dandenong's increased by 49% over the same period. Both also increased their importance as retail and commercial centres, and in Dandenong's case in particular, industrial uses as well. Having a second rail connection would have only accelerated this development throughout the second half of the 20th century, although this does assume that the green wedge zone that prevents most types of development between Frankston and Dandenong was not implemented. You only have to look at the fact that the roads between these two centres have always been busy thoroughfares since well before the Second World War. The constant construction and upgrades of roads throughout this area shows that authorities knew that there would be demand. And the countless studies and reports since then have identified the significant and increasing travel demand between Dandenong and Frankston, recommending that the government improve transport links between the two. This trend will only continue as Melbourne continues to sprawl into the southeastern suburban corridor. Even modelling for the Cranbourne East area forecasts the travel demand between Frankston and Cranbourne will more than double by 2031 on current trends. In any case, no detailed planning or construction was ever founded, and the idea seems to have completely dropped off the radar for over 40 years. Nevertheless, it remains an interesting project to think about, and how it could have changed the fabric of Melbourne. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more, please subscribe to the channel so that you can stay up to date on future videos. Also, please consider signing up to my supporters portal over at members.philipmallis.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.